we go, as we normally do, with our Seahawks first here, who continue to move throughout not spring training. I'm getting ahead of myself here. Through free agency. So free agency kicks off here, and the Seahawks instantly add some starter caliber players. Begins on the 13th when the team signed defensive tackle Dre'Mont Jones from the Denver Broncos to a 3-year, $51 million deal. $40 million of that is guaranteed, and he gets a $20 million signing bonus. Evens out to about $10 million per year. Jones had 47 tackles, 6.5 sacks, 9 tackles for loss, and 10 quarterback hits in 13 games last year for Denver. Is often referred to as one of the hardest working, most consistent inside defensive linemen in the league over the last few years that he's been in the NFL. So that's an impact signing immediately. There's been a lot of talk about the Seahawks adding in the D-line in the draft, and they still should do that. But this is a big help already for Seattle, looking to revitalize that defensive line, be able to stop the run a lot better, be able to create some more havoc, get to the quarterback, help their secondary out a little bit. So that is a big instant impact signing made by Seattle, and part of that is made possible by Geno Smith's deal and the way that it's structured and the way that it's laid out, like we talked about last week. So that was a big deal to start free agency off. The day after, the team brought back linebacker John Radigan. They tendered an offer to the exclusive right free agent linebacker / special teams mainstay. So Radigan's mainly sort of a depth piece, a special teams guy. He comes back. That same day, the team signed defensive tackle Jarran Reed to a 2-year deal. So Reed comes back after being drafted by Seattle out of the University of Alabama. Bounced around, spent some time in Kansas City, most recently Green Bay, and now he returns home to Seattle. So again, like I mentioned, with revitalizing that defensive line, Seattle seems to be getting back to, they bring back Reed, but getting some impact along the defensive tackle spot, and beefing that up a little bit after, again, being a team that really struggled against the run last year. Most notably when they let I believe they were, I want to say the 31st worst team at running the football per yards per game last year, when they let Tampa Bay run all over them in Germany, or when the Panthers ran all over Seattle, I believe, for 200 yards. You look at Josh Jacobs, had a massive game against Seattle last year. Jacobs, one of the better backs in the league, but you get the point here. Stopping the run was not something that Seattle really could do last season. And just getting better along the defensive line is always a good thing. Getting better in the trenches is always a key aspect to the football team. And on the 16th, they did that on the other side. And when they signed guard / center Evan Brown, spent a lot of time as a rotational sort of player along the Lions offensive line, and is viewed mostly as a center by general manager John Schneider. Now, some were kind of viewing this as he's the starter now with Austin Blythe retiring. I still believe that Seattle could draft a center in this year's selections. Michael Schmitz is a guy out of Minnesota who's been getting a lot of talk, but with the way that his stock might be rising, he might not be someone that Seattle can grab with their respective picks and where they see him going. But I don't want it to seem like Brown. It's been made. Some people have made it seem like that selection is going to be your starter at center, and I'm not completely buying it yet. I think that with Gabe Jackson gone and Phil Haynes likely taking that starting spot, you're going to need depth anyway, and this is another player that's versatile for Seattle. They can move him around the line there if need be. The team also re-signed quarterback Drew Lock to a 1-year deal. It's worth $4 million, can go up to $7.5 million depending on incentives for Lock, but only about $1.7 million of it is guaranteed. So very low risk sort of deal there to bring back Lock. So Seattle keeps their quarterback room that they had last season, and that the Smith deal and the Lock signing, albeit very low risk, kind of makes it seem like Seattle won't draft a quarterback at least decently high. But again, with little of that money being guaranteed, I still put that in the realm of possibility that maybe that can happen. Just saying maybe it's a little less likely. On the 17th, you can see here these things just keep. Seattle's been busy already in the first week. They signed linebacker Devin Bush to a one-year deal, so the former Steeler comes to Seattle. General Manager John Schneider, through this past week has talked a lot about different position groups, talked about linebacker being an area of concern. And they said after this Bush deal that they are still keenly interested in signing Bobby Wagner. So this was something where I don't know if it's just sort of short-term stuff where people just want to jump on anything, but there was this idea that the Devin Bush signing meant no Bobby Wagner. It's the first week of free agency. There's a lot still that can take place. The same day, the team signed safety Julian Love to a 2-year, $12 million deal. Now, Love is an interesting signing, considering the fact that he spent a good amount of time with the New York Giants as a starter. He wore the captaincy for the Giants on defense, so that's a big deal to bring an experienced leader into this group. Seattle has a very talented safety room now with Love, with Jamal Adams. Ryan Neal has been tendered, but that's a very low tender deal, and he could be signed by somebody else or someone could match that. And then Jamal Adams obviously trying to recover from that injury and hopefully stay healthy this year to be able to contribute to that safety room. Now, there's been a lot of talk that Seattle could release Adams because of his post-June designation cap cut. I don't know about that. That'll be an I want to see Jamal Adams succeed. I really do. The injuries have been unfortunate. You saw the impact that he had with Seattle when he was healthy, and he had the sack record, I believe, for DBs that year when Seattle won the division. I want him to be successful. I really do. I know a lot of people have angst about that. There's the talk about the deal with the first-round picks. Obviously, it was a big deal to acquire Adams. It's been unfortunate. It's been unfortunate, really. But, again, I just want to see them all succeed. I think Love adds a great aspect to that. Great, again, versatile player that Seattle can use around the lineup. So you want to look at it. It's funny because this applies to the Mariners as well. You don't want to look at a player as just spitting one spot. Like Evan Brown will probably play along the 3 inside parts of the offensive line. Julian Love will probably bounce around the secondary. So I want to keep that in mind, as we look through free agency here, especially because, again, there was worry. It was like the first few hours of free agency, some deals had been done, and people were like, oh, Seattle do something. It's like, hey, man, that Jones signing is a big deal. It's going to be a big deal, and that's something that, we'll probably look back at, during the season. So, I'm happy with the first week overall and what we've seen from Seattle. I don't know if you need to necessarily do much more. We do want to look at the losses here, or guys who decided to not come back to Seattle, guys who Seattle doesn't want to bring back. Cody Barton signed with the Washington Commanders. I said he wasn't going to be with Seattle, and I was right about that. I was kind of surprised he didn't try to sign back with the Seahawks. The team released defensive tackle Quentin Jefferson. Cutting Jefferson saves Seattle $4.49 million against the cap. So some moves there to acquire more space to bring guys in. Running back Rashad Penny decided to sign with the Philadelphia Eagles, which was an interesting move. He'll have a great offensive line to rush behind, so nothing but the best to Penny there. And then running back Travis Homer signed with the Chicago Bears. Now, those two moves of Penny and Homer going elsewhere means you've now got Walker on the roster. You've got DJ Dallas. I don't think Godwin Igwebuike is on the roster yet. So it likely means we might see another drafted running back, and you might see another veteran signed as well to this team, which is It's interesting to think about that, because it would have been great to see a 1-2 punch of Penny and Walker, but I think Penny wanted to change the scenery, and with Walker kind of taking over the league back spot, I don't know if he wanted to take that number 2 role. So interesting there, and those are your losses so far. We move over here to something that's not technically free agency related. On the 14th, the team announced its 2023 coaching staff. Not too many new moves. There's a few players, former players on this list, and then a few new positional coaches as well. So we'll go here. Obviously, Pete Carroll remains the head coach. Defensive coordinator Clint Hurt remains in that spot. Larry Izzo still the special teams coordinator. Shane Waldron stays as offensive coordinator. Roy Anderson in the secondary. Some notable things. Andy Dickerson stays along the offensive line. That was a big deal. BT Jordan, who you can see pictured here as the pass rush specialist, has been brought on. We move over here. You can see offensive passing game quarters and wide receiver coach Sanjay Lyle is a big addition. Well, not addition. He's a big piece of that as well, and he remains on there. Trying to see Greg Olsen, not former tight end Greg Olsen. Greg Olsen takes over as the quarterbacks coach. That was announced a few weeks ago. Assistant DB/cornerbacks coach is Sean Shedd, who you can see pictured here. Defensive assistant Nico Thorpe used to be a Seahawk as well. And then defensive assistant and D-line coach Will Tukuafa used to be a player as well. So 3 players that I can note here. I could be wrong. There could be a couple more guys who are older there that I don't recognize. But at least 3 former players is kind of interesting to note for the Seahawks there. In terms of league-related news, the only thing that really we wanted to pay attention to, because obviously with free agency starting, there's a lot of different things that have taken place across the league. But with league news, we try to keep it news that's kind of relevant to the Seahawks in the division primarily, or things that relate to the things that are at the top of the top headlines. And that we talked about the Rodgers saga. The Jets are confident that a Rodgers trade will happen. They believe that it eventually will happen. It will be sorted out. But from what I can gather and understand, and even Rodgers saying on the Pat McAfee show, is that the Packers are kind of holding that up. So we'll see if that takes place. I'm over it. If I was a Packers fan, I'd be tired. I know the 49ers did sign Javon Hargrave from the Eagles. That's a big deal. So their defensive line gets even better, which is scary. And, that's just ridiculous. So stuff like Javon Hargrave to the 49ers is why it's so key for the Seahawks to draft a guy like Michael Schmitz potentially, just so you can have a solid center position guy for years to come. Not necessarily like an Evan Brown who's a veteran, and maybe if he locks down that spot and is your starter for years to come, sure. But you don't want stopgap guys on that offensive line, especially when you're in a division with the 49ers and that defensive line. The Rams, I don't know what they're going to look like here going forward. But point being, when you plan to play your division, considering how many games are dedicated to them throughout the course of the regular season. And obviously, getting better along the trenches is always something that you want to improve upon. So that'll wrap things up for our Seahawks here. I'm getting ahead to myself. Perhaps it's excitement